Hello everyone and welcome to the Luca lecture. Alright, so some of y'all might be writing about this or considering writing about it, so I wanted to say some things to get the gears in your head turning if you did choose to write about Luca. First of all, let's get some background info. So this was the feature film debut of animator at Pixar Enrico Casarosa, who had previously directed the short film La Luna, which is also set in Italy. So, the film was inspired by Casarosa's childhood in Genoa, Italy, and it was released straight to Disney Plus, perhaps due to the pandemic, but I would speculate also because Disney had little faith in it. Because this isn't the loftiest or deepest of Pixar's movies. I did Soul in spring 2021, and it certainly had some very deep themes. Here, the themes aren't so deep, but they still are significant and relevant, I would argue. So, the point is, Disney, I speculate at least, didn't have much faith in this movie because it is very simple, and I'll admit that. But it resonated. It resonated a lot with audiences because it was a surprise hit. And apparently Disney is considering turning this into a franchise because of how popular it is, and it caught them off guard. They sent out a survey asking, would you be interested in a Luca sequel? So, yes, they really see potential here, and I think I can tell why. It's a very relatable story, and we're going to talk about that because this movie has a lot of appeal, more than the studio thought it would. Alright, so in order to understand the message of this film, it is a very simple, fairly straightforward message, but I think it is, even though it is a universal message, I think it's very much couched in our current times as well. To give y'all some historical and socio-cultural context that might help us understand this message in this film, it was released during the pandemic. This is a pandemic movie. Well, it's not about the pandemic, but it was released during it, and we can't help but wonder how the pandemic impacted its production, its story, etc. So, I was thinking about it, and this film is about inclusion at its core of different peoples. And during the pandemic, something we might forget nowadays because it generally has died down, but there was a lot of xenophobia against Asian people in the early days of the pandemic because we didn't understand the virus as well as we do now, and we were more scared of it, and it originated in China, and that led to harsh and unfair treatment of many Chinese people living in this country, and Asian people just in general living in this country. So we saw heightened xenophobia because of the pandemic. And of course, Luca and Alberto faced that same sort of xenophobia, which we'll talk about here in a second. The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of context for this film is the internet is abuzz talking about how this is a very LGBTQ related film, or at least seemingly. It's definitely not explicit as an LGBTQ film, but people have noted how the metaphor of being a sea monster can translate into being queer. And I would say there's definitely a lot of possibility in that reading. I think it's I think there's a lot of evidence in the film to back it up, which we'll talk about in a second. But that begs the question, why on earth, if an LGBTQ theme is in this film, why on earth would it be? I think the reason why is because nowadays LGBTQ folks are better represented in media, but they really haven't broken through in being represented as protagonists in Disney animated films. They have been in short films, such as Pixar's own Out, but they haven't really been fully represented. in major productions yet. So I think that's significant, especially considering all the talk around this film and its possible LGBTQ subtext. So we're going to talk about that as well. Okay, so genre. We talked about how genres arise according to different needs, and in this case, of course, Luca is a fantasy. It's a coming-of-age story, but its ultimate genre, and this is a fairly new genre, but I would consider it a genre nonetheless, it is a Disney movie, right? And because it's a Disney movie, we might draw comparisons to a similar Disney film, and that is The Little Mermaid. And because we have a similar basic premise of this person who lives in the sea wanting to explore the world above. But Disney, we can see they're trying to reinvent their image and sort of subvert the genre that they've created. And with the Disney genre, we might associate it with princesses and fairy tales, etc. And since the early 2010s, they've really been trying to both embrace that identity and turn it into something new. For example, with Frozen, if you've seen that film, it wasn't the love of a man that saved Anna. It was the love of her sister Elsa. So recent Disney films are sort of stepping away from romantic love, which was, the catalyst for everything that happened in The Little Mermaid, because she was in love with a prince. In this case, the love of friendship is what is emphasized among Luca, Alberto, and Giulia. So it definitely is playing with its genre as a Disney movie. At its core, Luca is a fish out of water story. It's not a love story per se, at least not in the conventional sense like The Little Mermaid is, but it still has a lot of common with that film, because Luca, like Ariel, is fascinated by human culture, but struggles to fit in once in a human town. So they both collect artifacts, for example, and of course Ariel brushes her hair with a fork because she doesn't understand the culture she's entered, and the same thing happens with Luca and Alberto.
Classic human town. Pretty cool, right?
Hey, you do it now. Just say the thing.
Madams, what's wrong with you, stupido?
He says, "What's wrong with you, stupido?" to the ladies, and as such, they get hit because they don't understand that's a proper greeting. So what this represents is the immigrant experience, because I would argue that Luca is basically the story of a young immigrant. And it's really more emphasized in this film than in previous Disney films, like The Little Mermaid, which this film is similar to. Because, yes, Ariel is a foreigner and enters a culture she doesn't quite grasp, but that's not the emphasis of the Little Mermaid. The emphasis is romantic love, like in many Disney fairy tales. Here, it's more about fitting in. And I think that really is why this film is so popular, and popular out of nowhere, because it's a relatable story. Who hasn't felt like they didn't fit in before? Be it at school, be it at work, be it in any context, everyone's felt left out at some point or another, or everyone's felt different in some way. So, yeah, it is an immigrant story. It's a fish out of water story, and it's an immigrant story. Because, and I think that is very probable a reading of it as an immigrant story, because its director, Our communicator, Enrico Casarosa, is an immigrant himself. He's an Italian immigrant. And Luca is also an immigrant. So, yes, as I said, Luca and Alberto don't understand human culture, and that gives them some trouble fitting in. And they do contend with actual xenophobia, because Luca's parents try to shelter him from this xenophobia because they know it exists. But it not going out into the world at all doesn't make Luca happy, because Luca is what? Luca is a shepherd, and he himself is a sort of sheep, just following what he's supposed to do day in and day out, and not seeing the world. And he is going to be sentenced because of the xenophobia of the world. His parents decide that he needs to be sent to live with Uncle Ugo, right? Parents want him to go live with Uncle Ugo down below in the deep trenches. And what a contrast that is to his fantasies of literally launching into the air. And seeing the wide world and learning about the world. That's what he wants. But his parents want to sequester him away from the world. Because they're scared of what he'll have to face. But the film is really speaking to people like immigrants and people who feel left out, telling them that they need to go into the world to find happiness. And yes, there will be obstacles, but you should overcome those obstacles instead of avoiding them. And the obstacle in this case is of course xenophobia. And we even have a xenophobe as an antagonist, because we have Ercole, who says things like, "You two don't belong here, get out of my town," which echoes, anti-immigrant sentiments like, "You don't belong in this country, go home, go back to where you came from," etc. Ercole even dehumanizes the sea monsters, Alberto and Luca. He says, "You are not even people." And that also reflects how some people might view immigrants as not human, as horrible as that is. But we can see that the film very much speaks against xenophobia and is meant to be inspiring to immigrants who step out into the world in order to inspire them to overcome obstacles instead of hiding, in other words. And the symbol for that is definitely the Vespa, the biggest symbol, I would say, in the film. We see that poster that says Vespa is freedom. And the Vespa really does allow Luca freedom, because it allows him in his mind to explore the wide open world. Alberto says it can take you anywhere in the stinking world. And it also allows him to explore and learn, because Luca wants to learn. He wants to go to school with Julia when she introduces him to science and astronomy and all this stuff that fascinates him. And he does eventually go to school, so the Vespa really serves as a symbol of all of his desires to explore and learn. And that eventually does come to fruition when he gets on the train to Genoa at the end of the film. We also can note that Alberto doesn't know much about the world because he hasn't received an education. He thinks stars are fish, etc. But Luca inspires him to go out and explore the world despite xenophobia, to tackle it instead of hide from it, as he'd been doing on his island. And Alberto does thank him for helping him get off the island. at the end of the film. So Luca is a figure who really stands for overcoming obstacles. And it is a bit ironic, obstacles related to being an immigrant, and it is a little ironic because Alberto had been the one pushing Luca to take more risks, with his whole mantra of Silenzio Bruno, whenever you don't want to do something. Telling that voice in your head to shut up because life shouldn't be wasted. You should take risks, put yourself out there. And that's what Luca does. And Luca also teaches Alberto that it's not just about taking risks, it's about overcoming prejudice, overcoming xenophobia, whereas Alberto was content to just live on his home on the island. Luca really brings him out of that and shows him it's important to combat xenophobia, which is what they do. Alright. So, we talked about the immigrant aspect to this, and I also wanted to talk about how it could be significant to the LGBTQ community. First of all, I acknowledge fully that this is not an explicitly LGBTQ film, and nothing about Casarosa's background. He is a straight man. Nothing indicates that it's something he intended, but just because he did not intend it doesn't necessarily mean it's not there. I honestly think it's a pretty good reading considering the nature of the sea monsters and how they transform and have to hide their true identities, but we'll talk about that here in a second. So, as I was talking about before, in terms of citational context, its place among other Disney films, it is a cousin to The Little Mermaid in its basic content. And The Little Mermaid, of course, was about Ariel wanting her prince. It was about romantic love. And because of that, we can possibly see, using The Little Mermaid as a reference, that romantic love, even though it's not obvious, might still be underneath between Luca and Alberto. At the same time, though, this film represents, as I had said, Disney trying to step away from conventional fairy tale heterosexual romances by showing that other types of love are just as valuable. And in this case, it's the love of friends, right? These three friends. So it could simply be that, but I want to talk about the possible metaphor of the sea monsters representing being queer. So Disney had included some LGBTQ representations. In their media, there is a kiss in Rise of Skywalker between two women, but it's blink and you'll miss it. And there's also a film by Pixar about a man having to come out to his parents when his boyfriend is coming over. So it's not like they haven't represented LGBTQ individuals in their films. They just haven't represented them in a major release. And there had been calls for them to do so, because they are lukewarm in representing LGBTQ people in their stuff. And there had been calls on social media for them to go ahead and take that plunge. Because Elsa from the Frozen franchise, there was a campaign to give her a female love interest in the sequel, Frozen 2, which came out in 2019, and she got no love interest. They opted instead to leave her single and show that that's just as valid as being in a heterosexual relationship, but they didn't take the extra step. They did not, it's like they didn't want to go further with saying that heterosexual fairy tale romance is the only valid love. They show self-love is just as important. They show the love of friendship and the love of family. The love of sisters is just as important. But they just can't quite get to non-heterosexual romantic love being just as important. Maybe they'll get there one day. But who knows? Who knows? At least they aren't willing to do that with a major character, and who Elsa is basically the face of Disney. She's the new Mickey Mouse at this point. So we'll see if they choose to take the plunge and represent LGBTQ people with a major character in a major release. But in a sense, this film might be self-aware of Disney and their pseudo representation of LGBTQ people, because it does seem to have LGBTQ themes, at least through metaphor. Because we do have, for example, this scene at dinner with Julia's dad, who is a fisherman, said to, or it's assumed that he would hate sea monsters. And Julia even says, of all places for sea monsters to visit, you come to Porto Rosso, a fishing community. It really stands in for a homophobic town, or a homophobic community. And this uncomfortable dinner scene very much might reflect a homophobic parent or family member, and a queer young person having to be in the closet in order to avoid conflict or even potentially danger. And of course they might be in danger. He's a fisherman. He might harpoon them. You never know. And they have to not get splashed with water, and they have to stay dry to conceal their true identities. So I can see the metaphor. I think if there's anything, if the sea monsters are a metaphor, and the head of Pixar, Pete Docter, has said they're a metaphor for feeling different. If there's any way of feeling different that they fit the best, at least in my opinion, it's having to hide yourself as a queer individual, having to stay in the closet. They conceal their identities by staying dry. Staying dry is basically being in the closet, metaphorically speaking. So, yeah, I can definitely see the queer themes here. And at the end of the day, though, who is the one who saves Luca and Alberto from being harpooned? It is none other than
Giulietta.
Papa,
Look at that.
You're not going anywhere.
Come on.
I saw them first. The reward is mine.
we're not afraid of you.
No, but we're afraid of you. Everyone is horrified and disgusted by you because you are monsters.
Stop! They're not monsters!
Oh yeah? Who are they then?
I know who they are. They are Luca and Alberto. And they are the winners.
Yup. It is Julia's dad, Julia's fisherman dad, who saves Luca and Alberto and exhorts the town of Porto Rosso to accept them. And the reason why, so he comes around, quote unquote, like many parents of queer youth are coming around more and more nowadays towards acceptance of their children. And I think the reason he comes around is because he can empathize, because empathy is what fosters tolerance, and everyone should learn empathy, the film seems to say. He is different too. He's lost an arm. Well, he hasn't lost an arm, because this is very interesting too, because if you remember, he didn't lose an arm.
A sea monster ate it.
What?
No. This is how I came into the world.
He was born without one. He says, "This is how I came into the world." Very much an echo of the phrase "born this way," which we hear a lot as to counter the notion that LGBTQ identity is chosen. So everyone is different in some way, and a lot of people are born differently. And because of that, he's able, and of course, they're born as sea monsters. And of course, the Julia's father can empathize because he was born different too. and that's how he accepts them. Alright, so we can see parallels between struggles that immigrants face, and I think that's really supported by Casa Rosa's immigrant status. And we see reflections of struggles LGBTQ people, especially LGBTQ youth, face. And I think that's very well supported by the nature of the sea monsters and how they are humans when dry and sea monsters when wet, and how their identities are concealable and feeling pressure to conceal their true identities, etc. So yeah, we can see how both those readings have evidence for them. And I think overall, though, we can find the film has a main point of some people. The grandmother at the end says, some people, they'll never accept him, talking about Luca, but some will. Alright, so that basically covers what the film's main point is, and as we said, the main point of a rhetorical text usually comes at the beginning or the end. In this case, I'd say it comes at the end. The main point is inclusion, diversity. That's the ultimate message. But it's going to be hard to achieve inclusion and diversity if you don't have support. And at the end, Luca is surrounded by both his friends and family, and they're all together in this one shot. So the idea is, in order to overcome obstacles as someone who is marginalized, you have to have the support of your friends and family, and eventually you'll make it through. You'll do great things. You'll go off to see the world and become a well-rounded person, and you'll go to school and learn things and go on adventures. So, yes, in order to make it, you need to have, and I'm just noticing this now, it ends in the sky, just like Luca launching into the sky on his Vespa in his fantasies. So in order to reach the sky, as someone who might be put down for your sexuality, your ethnicity, or whatever it is, because I really think it could be anything, you need support from your friends and family. So it's a message about diversity and inclusion. It's a message about love from your friends and family. And it really is an underdog story. And Julia even calls their team in the triathlon the underdogs, because that's what they are. They're people who just struggle to fit in. But that struggle will become easier if you have your friends and family support. No matter who you are, you can find a way to fit in, reach the sky, in spite of people like Erica Lay and other xenophobic, homophobic, or what have you, people who might be an obstacle. Alright, and of course, like it doesn't have to apply just to LGBTQ people or immigrants. It could apply to virtually anyone, because everyone's been excluded at one point or another. Alright. So, that is the message of the film, as I see it, and of course, you might see it differently. And I encourage you, if you are writing about this, not to simply regurgitate what I've said. I don't want you to do that. I want you to build off what I have said, and hopefully what I've said here will get the gears in your brain turning as you analyze this film. And yes, this was the Luca lecture. Happy writing if you are writing about this one. And if you are writing about Get Out, but decided to stop by to see what Luca is all about, thanks for listening. And if you're writing about Luca, thanks for listening. And I will see you guys next time.